With the last Sunday before Thursday's elections came a final push from parties vying for votes and their studio messengers. One leader, though, appearing to get cold feet.
Not, however, Nigel Farage, who, as we told you last week, was fixed to be here. His team told us he'd changed his mind.
He was no doubt to be asked about an undisclosed personal £5 million gift from one of Reform UK's crypto billionaire donors shortly before he decided to run as an MP in 2024. The party says no rules were broken, that the cash was for his security. The Conservatives, however, having referred him to the Standards Commissioner this week over it, were quick to make hay. Like Reform, the Greens are set to sweep seats in Labour councils this Thursday. Their leader faced questions for the first time after his apology for a repost on X, accusing officers of being heavy-handed in their arrest of the Golders Green stabbing suspect this week.
Well, the first thing I did was recognise that this was a horrific crime, and I showed solidarity to the victims and their families. I then thanked the emergency responders for the brave work they did. I found it all very traumatic, especially as a Jewish person, and I also found the video that was circulating online traumatic too. I accept, though, that conversation about that video needs to be had with the Commissioner rather than on X.
Conservative leader Kemi Badenoch used her spot to call for a ban on pro-Palestinian marches.
We've had them now for over 2 years. Enough is enough. They are creating a climate that is normalising a hatred towards Jews, and I think they need to be stopped.
The Lib Dems disagreed.
So I think the right to peaceful protest is a cornerstone of a liberal democracy. The right to incite hatred and violence is not.
So is it right to look at banning marches then?
I think no. I think it is right to look at policing marches properly.
Good to see you. Oh, well. How are you?
In Armenia today, under the more favourable light of international diplomacy, a Prime Minister whose personal ratings have taken a hammering. Amid warnings over jet fuel supplies, the government has announced a new and temporary law allowing airlines to move passengers onto fewer planes. And so it was the Transport Secretary doing the rounds this morning to reassure holidaymakers.
There is no shortage of jet fuel at the moment, and when I spoke to the airlines on Thursday, they're really confident about the next 6 to 8 weeks of supply. That's really normal. I am confident that the majority of people who are flying this summer from the UK will have a similar experience to that which they had last year.
The Iran war has delivered a hammer blow to a campaign promise to bring down the cost of living. For Starmer, in Thursday's local elections in England and parliamentary elections in Scotland and Wales, looms not just the threat of a drubbing, but of emboldened leadership challenges and MPs on manoeuvres. Here's a government at the mercy of ever-shifting allegiances.
Amelia Jem reporting. Well, earlier this afternoon, I spoke to the election expert, Sir John Curtis. I asked him how significant he thinks the upcoming local elections will be.
Well, these elections are the first major test of the development that at least the opinion polls have identified, which is the fragmentation of British politics. At the moment, according to the opinion polls, the most popular party, Reform, is running only at 26%, and the least popular, the Liberal Democrats, are still at 12%. So we've got 5 parties bunched very much together.
How bad, potentially, do you think it could get for Labour and Sir Keir Starmer?
Given they're basically running at around half the share of the vote that they had back at the time that the English local elections were carrying on, substantial losses are quite considerable. And some of them could well be headline grabbing. For example, places like Barnsley and Sunderland, which Labour have been running ever since they were created in 1974, according to the polling we've got, could conceivably go to Reform. That said, I think the one area which is rather less certain, and whether or not actually, even though perhaps Labour might end up with a record low share of the vote, that this won't necessarily be reflected in losses of seats, is in London. In London at the moment, at least according to the polling, Labour, yes, way down, but still ahead of everybody else, including, crucially, the Greens.
Wales, could that be no Labour majority in Wales, the first time that we've seen something like that? How significant will that be for the psyche of Labour in Wales?
Wales looks like a battle between Plaid and Reform. Very, very different from what it was back at the last election in 2021. And certainly, maybe, if indeed Labour have a really bad night on Thursday, Wales, in a sense, will sum it up, because here will be a once-in-a-century loss for the Labour Party, which will be very difficult to simply suggest is simply the consequence of midterm blues.
Are we just seeing the end of two-party politics here?
The days when working class people voted Labour and middle class people voted Conservative, those seem to be over. So the demographic anchor of the traditional party system has gone. And meanwhile, our politics is no longer a battle between left and right, just about issues to do with economic inequality. They're also to do with so-called culture wars issues. And in particular, Reform are very, very much securing the support of people who we would regard as being at the socially conservative end of the spectrum on culture wars. The Focus thinks that some of the recent social changes have just been going too far. And the Greens also, their voters are also economically left-wing. They're also being distinguished by being social liberal, woke in their attitudes, to use another language. So there are important changes in what our politics are about that has made it more difficult for Conservative and Labour to maintain ground coalitions.
Is that what our politics is now going forward? It's going to be a whole load of unpredictable swings, further fragmentation and coalitions?
If you look at France, Germany, Spain, Greece, the Netherlands, they've all seen significant changes in their politics and for the most part have tended to see fragmentation. They've tended to see the rise of a new populist right-wing party, not that dissimilar to Reform. And then we have to ask ourselves, well, why should the United Kingdom necessarily be different?
Professor John Curtice, thank you very much.
You're welcome.